Hey there, it's Fiona Lisa on VL Speaks, a little ancient wisdom with a modern twist. Today, what am I talking about? Senses and urges. Why? Because we've all got them. Why is that important? Well, when you're trying to develop new habits, healthier habits, you have to pay attention to what your urges say and how your senses play into it. Because there's no way of getting around these two things, right? So let's start with your senses. How many do you have? Well, I say you have 6 in total, but 5 to start with. You've got taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing. Ready? The 6th one, I like to call it the sixth sense. I'm not the only one to say this. This is not something revelatory. The sixth sense, that intuition, that kind of knowing. You know, some people call it spidey senses, tingling. Some people feel it in their whole bodies. Certain people feel it in certain parts of their body. It could just be a thought that comes through. I think you know what I'm talking about. By now, I think that it's mainstream to know about intuition. How it works is another story, and how to make it better is another podcast. Then we have the urges: food, sleep, sex, self-preservation. And then the 5th, I've heard some people call it the urge to merge. And I don't mean in the sexual sense. I mean the urge to merge with the divine, right? Self-realization, talking about a lot of this in episode 32, knowing yourself. And I feel that that is, it's a very strong urge as you mature more, as you become more in tune with who you are. All right, so let's talk about how the senses tie in with the urges. I think you can already start putting this together in your head and why it's important. The urges, right? The need for food, for sleep, the biological urge to have sex, and also because you care about someone, you love someone. It's not always just about lust. And then self-preservation, keeping yourself alive, right? The thing of it is what happens when these things kind of get out of balance? And then how do the senses play a part in all of this? I think this is worth talking about because I've been talking about this with a lot of people, especially when you're dealing with people that you know that have a tendency towards addictions. Okay, so maybe you do, maybe you don't, but this is an important thing to know about yourself. Let's start with food because it's very basic, right? We all like to eat food, some people more than others. And sometimes we use food for celebrating and also for nourishment, obviously, because the body's not going to work properly for a very extended period of time if you're not consuming food. And more importantly, nutritious food, okay? Food that has nutrients in it, all right? What are the senses that tie into food? Well, I think all of the senses tie into food. How? Well, you're making your food, you're touching it, right? And hopefully you make more of your meals than buying processed food out on the street. And it's always wonderful to go to a wonderful restaurant. It's important to support local businesses and farms as well. But you need to eat, right? You need to eat. It's next to water and, of course, air being the most important thing, breathing. But you got to eat. Now, how you eat, when you eat, all of the senses come into play with this, right? And let's talk about food as far as eating goes. First of all, taste starts in the nose. That's one thing you should know. We talked about touch, touching your food, right? Especially when you're preparing it or someone that you care about is preparing it, or going to a place where you know they love to cook. That food is imbued with love. Okay, I don't know if you've ever heard about this movie. It was a book first called Like Water for Chocolate. And there's a character in this movie. The movie came out quite some time ago. And whatever emotions she was feeling went into that food. So whoever ate that food was feeling whatever those emotions were. And I think there's a lot to that. Okay? If you're eating like a lot of processed food, fake food, there's not a lot of nutrients in there, and there's not a lot of love in it either. And in those processed foods where there are extreme flavor profiles, like either really spicy and salty or very, very sweet, if there's a lot of fake ingredients in there, in other words, man made chemical ingredients in there, a lot of the stuff that's being made right now, they're making it to hook you into eating more of it. Be assured of that. Okay? So all of your senses, you may see, well, how does hearing get involved in food? Well, let's say you hear someone go into the kitchen and they're cooking, and you're like, oh, there might be something for me coming out of this. And then you smell it, right? And then you see it, and you're like, oh, that's beautiful. And then maybe it's food that you like rip and dip, and you touch it and you eat it, right? That whole process, think about how people were eating before when there weren't any utensils. They were using their hands, okay? So just keep that in mind when you're eating, right? And I think that when you take into account that all of your senses are involved, then you also kind of want to enjoy that process of eating. I was sitting next to a woman in a restaurant. We had met a couple of times before. I go there quite a bit. Shuka. And I like to sit, that was a shout out to Shuka. And I like to go and sit at this corner. And this is this woman that I met. And it was wonderful to watch her eat because she was savoring every single bite. And you could tell that she was completely into the food. And it was very nice to watch her. It was like all of her senses were present to eat this. So keep that in mind when it comes to food. And then you might find yourself making healthier choices in what you eat. I've talked about food before and cleansing and all that stuff. But when you take into account that all of these senses are playing a part when you are eating, how you shop for your food. Okay? It's another thing. How you shop and where you shop for your food. These are things you want to keep in your mind. And let's face it, with the amount of inflation that's going on right now, don't you want to eat the best you can possibly eat for your dollar? Of course you do. If you're going to be dropping that kind of money, don't you want to make sure that it's the best you can possibly eat? Yeah, you do. All right, moving along. Sleep. I've talked a bit about this. I haven't really dived into this because I know there's a lot of people that take sleep aids to get themselves to sleep. And what I will say about that is please don't mix it with alcohol. It's super dangerous. I've seen people do that, and I've been surrounded by people that do it. They really do a lot of things that are dangerous for them and not healthy, and it kind of feeds into a really unhealthy loop. What senses are involved in this? Well, these are the things that you would like to do with your senses when you're getting ready to sleep, and that is to withdraw. Okay? Withdraw from looking at screens on your phone, on your computer, TV, screen, because there are huge ones now. They're massive. Withdraw the sense of sight when you're getting ready to go to sleep. Withdraw from eating before you go to sleep, which is taste, right? Withdrawing from your sense of hearing. Things get quieter, hopefully, at night, in the evening, wherever you are. Even in the city, things do quiet down, unless it's a party night, depending on what part of the city you live in. But withdrawing your sense is what you want to do when you're getting ready to go to sleep. Why? So that you can go to sleep and stay asleep. But if you've gotten into the habit of constantly bombarding your system, all of your senses, before you go to sleep, it makes it much harder to sleep, and then it makes much harder to stay asleep. I can tell you one thing. The smell of food is something that I do not want in my bedroom. Or sound. The sound of TV, the sound of people talking, anything. I don't mind crickets and frogs. that's cool. Or any kind of a low murmuring, like a fan or something like that. That's fine, white noise. But the smell of food is incredibly distracting when you're trying to sleep. Okay? And if you're trying to get back into a rhythm of sleeping well, I've talked about this a lot, you've got to regulate the time that you get up and the time that you go to sleep. And also, if you can, get the earbuds and the headphones off of your ears before you're going to sleep. It's amazing how this really distorts your sense of hearing and also brain waves, unless you're listening to the ocean or something like that, or they're just noise canceling headphones so that you don't have to listen to anything when you're trying to fall asleep. But really disconnecting your senses is what's going to help you get better sleep. And then you won't find yourself like fussing through the whole night and being like, oh, you got to catch up with sleep in the middle of the day, or you're sleeping in and then you're late. And then there's this whole, if you can avoid it, withdraw all of your senses. And I've done episodes on relaxation, so check them out because it helps you to calm down and sleep. Okay, the next topic. I've talked about this in other episodes that I would be very strategic and skillful when I talk about this because it's a big subject. It's a loaded word. It's a loaded word. And I'm just saying that in the very strictest sense. Sex. How many of the senses does it involve? All of them. Plus your intuition. And hopefully if your intuition is working really well, it'll keep you from doing things that you might regret at a later date. Okay. Sex. Let's talk about sex, baby. What do I want to say about this? There's so much that I want to say about this. I could devote an entire episode to this, but I'm going to keep it brief because there's other things to talk about. I keep my ear to the ground and I listen to people when they speak about different topics, younger and older and in my age bracket. And let's face it, sex is what makes the world go round. We'd hope it's love, but sex and money, living below the belt, tend to be where most people live. I call it living below the belt, below the belly, down, right? Feeding into the baser aspects of our senses. I hear that there are a lot of younger people that are opting out of sex entirely, and I think that's very interesting and probably wise to some degree because they're obviously not finding any fulfillment in it, so they don't want to do that. And I think that's interesting. But without sex, it's hard to have families and children and make the world go round, right? There's no shortage of people on the planet at this point, okay? And I don't want to get into the whole aspect of babies. That's a completely different subject, and it's sacred, in my opinion. Bringing life into the world is sacred. So what happens when it's happening between two people? And to me, I don't care about the gender or anything about that. I'm going to say consenting adults, mature people that are coming to this act with a sense of awareness. But let's face it, there's a lot of it that happens in drunken moments or in moments of heat and lust. And it happens, okay, especially when you're younger because your hormones are raging. But if this was thought about, I wish this was thought about much more from a practical sense than a moral standpoint. There's so much that's happening when sex happens, okay? There's a lot of hormones running through your body. And depending on where you're coming from and what you've been through in your life and what your exposure was to sex growing up and how you were taught about it and what was modeled for you in your home, this can be a very confusing subject. And in this country, for some reason, it's like it's on opposite ends. You got people that are like super, super puritanical about it, and then people that are like super, super all over the place, all out. You know, I think it would be very healthy for people to think, and this is empirically speaking, because I've been on the planet for a while. I have circled the sun a few times, quite a few. So I'm speaking from personal experience and then being out there with people in the world, speaking to people and having them also speak to me about their personal lives. And I've got to say that if people were taught not just the fact that, you can get pregnant and then what happens? It's not just about that. It's also about what is happening between the two people that are having the sex, right? There are emotions, whether you want to believe it or not, and you can try and compartmentalize them all you want. But the fact of the matter is that just takes the humanness and the compassion out of the equation of who you are. Okay, that hit it and quit it mentality, it gets old real quick, and it can be really damaging to you as a person over time, because then you just start to look at people as objects, okay, and not much else. And then you close yourself off from really connecting with another human being, which is ultimately part of the process of sex, of intercourse, of being with another person, is that there is an exchange. Because when there isn't a real exchange, energetically, mentally, emotionally, all of those things, someone's missing out here. I think both people are missing out. There are people that can say, oh, it didn't mean anything, whatever. But you know what? That's not true. That is just not true. Wouldn't it be more wonderful to be connecting with someone on many different levels, and you know who you are and they know who they are, and you know what they want and you know what you want and you know what they want, and this is a mutual exchange? I mean, I believe that can be a spiritual experience. And ultimately, I believe that that's, excuse the rockin', I believe that ultimately that is what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be an uplifting, enlightening experience. And let's face it, it can be incredibly euphoric. But don't you want it to mean something at the end of the day? No? Is there anything sacred left around the subject? That's for you to decide. But I think it's important that you think about it. Because in listening to some of the younger people, I've heard some really cool things coming from them. The much younger millennials and Gen Zers, there is especially amongst males, interestingly enough, they are caring more about who they hook up with and what that looks like. And I think that's really good. I mean, we don't want to have to develop like unhealthy views about the opposite sex over time. And I've seen it happen. I've heard men call all women crazy, and females saying, males saying, oh, all chicks are crazy, and the females saying all guys are jerks. And it's like, well, everybody has the potential to be a jerk. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female. But I think it stems from all of these experiences that they're having emotionally and sexually, and not really understanding how to come to grips with what that means in your own life. And I can say from experience that it is much better to come to this environment knowing who you are and what you want and what you stand for, and then who that person is and what they want and what they stand for. And yes, all of your senses are involved in this. And if you're very discerning, that sixth sense, that intuition is really going to help you separate yourself in situations. It doesn't always happen, and I wish that there was more, that there was healthier and better relating, that we could go beyond it, so that we're just not slave to our urges or our senses, but that we are treating this with a certain level of sacredness. Okay, so moving right along. I think I said enough on that. I think I spent more time on that than anything else thus far, except for the last urge. Last-ish. Self-preservation, right? Staying alive. What senses are involved in that? All of them. All of them are involved, especially hearing. And that goes for animals too. They will hear something, most likely, in the forest or in the jungle, probably even in the ocean too. There are mammals, dolphins and orcas and whales will give cues that they can hear, sonar. But for us even, right? If you hear a siren coming in your car or down the street, you know that there's an ambulance coming from some direction. So probably not walk out into the middle of the street when when you hear that, okay? And you can also, let's say if there's a baby crying, right? So hearing and sight, very important, right? And also smell and touch. If something's hot, oh, don't touch that. You're going to get burned. Sometimes you figure it out afterwards. But all of the senses are involved in self-preservation. Now, when we go into it a little bit deeper in regards to life and how it plays out, when, not if, but when you were living a more healthy and balanced lifestyle, self-preservation is not the first thing that you're thinking about all the time, right? Because you've got a pretty good handle on what's going on in your life. If you're constantly, let's say, worried about money so that you can eat and you can do this and you can do that just to live, you're in a state of high alert. That kind of level of self-preservation keeps you in a constant state of high alert. I mean, when I see what's going on around the world, and wars unfortunately have been fought forever because humans, yeah, and they're profitable these days for some people. But imagine how they're living. Imagine how their basic urges are not being met. And imagine what their senses are going through. I just wanted to add that. It gives you an extra level of gratitude and also compassion. But if you're in a place of being, let's say, you've got stuff, but you're like, gotta have more, because you never know. You just gotta have more of whatever, shoes, bags, furniture, cars, whatever it is. When it's in excess, right, what it kicks in then is more anxiousness, right? You're like, because what if somebody takes it from you, right? What if someone takes your money? What if somebody takes your stuff? Again, you're living in another state of high anxiety. Okay, so when it comes to self-preservation, it's about balance, just like all of the other urges. And simpler is better, because just because you have more doesn't mean that you're going to be happier. Okay. So you can become a slave to your senses and your urges if you're not paying attention. Or you can pay attention to them, see how they play into one another, and then start doing things differently. The next episode, I'm going to get into taming the cravings, giving you some very specific ways to look at how the senses and the urges play out and what cravings are, and then how they start to affect your life, and then how to bring it into balance and keep it in balance, because it's a constant thing. It's not like it's static. It's constantly fluctuating. Life is constantly fluctuating for you. And then the whole idea is, how do we manage this ever-changing landscape in our lives and maintain some kind of inner stability? All right, well, that's the next episode, Taming the Cravings. Alrighty, thanks for stopping in. Leave a comment, share, subscribe, the things. Just please be respectful. And if you've got questions, write them down there. And if there are any topics that you'd like me to hit, please write it down. Okay? Thanks for stopping in. You take good care. Ciao.